In recent decades, stories of uncontacted tribes have spread across the world.
These extraordinary images, lost tribes.
The photos went viral.
But along with this attention comes a lot of disinformation. It's time to bust the myths about uncontacted tribes. Some people have disputed the very existence of uncontacted tribes and accused people of staging these images. But these conspiracy theorists have misunderstood what uncontacted actually means. We're not talking about the people from King Kong's Skull Island. Uncontacted is a term applied to certain indigenous peoples who avoid all contact with outsiders. But that doesn't mean they've never met other humans. Everybody has neighbours. In the case of uncontacted tribes, that's likely to be other indigenous groups with whom they might even trade. It's partly through these networks that we know so much about where uncontacted peoples live. And these tribes don't stop being uncontacted just because someone filmed them or they've got metal tools. If they continue to avoid all contact with outsiders, they're considered uncontacted. Calling uncontacted tribes a hoax isn't just ludicrous, it's also dangerous. Lobbyists and politicians love spreading the myth they don't exist, so industries can invade their lands and profit from their resources.
You press the button, boom, suddenly you're in the Stone Age.
No one on this planet is stuck in the Stone Age. All peoples change and adapt over time. This myth is based on the idea that one way of living is fundamentally superior to another, a belief system that led colonialists to exploit and enslave entire nations. Uncontacted peoples are more than aware that outsiders live beyond the borders of their land, and they have every right to choose how they relate to us. Also, uncontacted tribes are not all the same. There are over 100 groups throughout the world, all with distinct languages, cultures, and knowledge. Given this diversity, you might ask, why lump them all together? Because despite their diversity, uncontacted tribes do all share one thing in common. They're the most vulnerable peoples on Earth. Many cultures foster prejudice about their own superiority, but that prejudice becomes really dangerous if it means people think they have the right to force others to change. The whole world now knows what it's like to be faced with a new disease to which we have no immunity. But imagine being part of a community that doesn't just lack immunity to COVID, but could easily die from flu or even the common cold. As recently as the 1980s, missionaries made contact with the uncontacted Zoe people. They brought these common diseases with them, and about 25% of the tribe died. And after the devastating impact of contact, what comes next? We've seen how our so-called developed nations treat those who are undocumented, traumatized, and seen as different. Uncontacted peoples are not suddenly going to be able to buy a house in the suburbs, claim health insurance, and access their pensions. They will be forced into poverty, exploited, and dependent on handouts to survive. But if their lands are protected and they're left alone, not only do we avoid passing on deadly diseases, but it means they're free to decide their own futures. Uncontacted peoples avoid outsiders. In most cases, when their lands are invaded, they flee. But in some instances, they will take action to defend it. In 2018, a missionary named John Chow attempted to contact the Sentinelese, an uncontacted tribe who live on an island in the Indian Ocean. Over the years, they've made it very clear they don't want outsiders to visit them, but John Chow ignored the warnings. On his second trip to the island, he was shot with arrows and died. His body remains there to this day. To understand why some uncontacted tribes react this way, we have to consider where they're coming from. Throughout the colonial era, areas like the Amazon were like the Wild West. Gold miners, rubber barons, and cattle ranchers had free rein to exploit the land and seek their fortune. When they encountered groups of indigenous people, they didn't stop to ask for consent. They used guns and violence to clear them out of the way. Millions of indigenous people were killed. Survivors of this genocide would have fled. And like any refugee the world over, they looked for a place where they could feel safe again. Many of today's uncontacted peoples are descendants of these survivors, and that trauma would be passed down through the generations. Is it really any surprise that uncontacted tribes are so wary of outsiders? Actually, this is true. If uncontacted tribes are left alone and have their land rights respected, they thrive. But they need our support because the odds are massively stacked against them. Missionaries continue to seek out new converts, oil companies and loggers destroy their land, politicians deny their existence, and governments refuse to recognize their rights. So we can't be complacent. We need to stand with them. So share this video, make sure everyone knows the case is closed, uncontacted tribes do exist, they're the most vulnerable peoples on earth, forced contact is deadly and immoral, and they have the right to survive and to decide their own futures. But that can only happen if their lands are protected. We are not powerless. We can all take action to make a change. Right now, several uncontacted tribes are on the verge of having their lands invaded. Loggers, cattle ranchers, and gold miners are poised to overrun their territories. If that happens, these uncontacted peoples will be wiped off the face of the earth. Thousands of people have already demanded their land stay protected. Join them.